All right, so I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind for a little bit. And especially with all of these MCU shows that we've gotten over the past, I guess it's almost been 3 or 4 years now, and with the coming of the DCU, which is going to follow a similar, though I think a little bit different model of having shows that are canonical to the universe while also having movies. I wanted to ask a question. I guess assessing, first of all, whether or not the MCU's model has been good and has worked thus far. And I think the answer we'll find quickly is no for various different reasons. But then I think the ultimate question I want to ask here is how should the MCU and the DCU to a lesser extent, because we haven't seen how they're actually going to display and how they're going to go about their shows, but really, should these shows be canon? Right? How should these shows be approached, and how should they function in their respective universes? I think this is a question that actually, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was the topic of conversation at both Marvel and DC for many, many hours. Extensive meetings were had about this question of how should we approach narratively. I'm not talking about marketing. I'm not talking about what shows to greenlight necessarily, although that is a part of what I'm about to talk about. But really the question of how do we, in terms of the fabric of our overall universe, how should we approach these shows? Now, I want to take you guys back to, it's about, let's say 2017. The MCU is in full swing. Let's go 2018. We're approaching Infinity War. People are excited. I'm excited, of course. But the question that I often got asked was, well, do I need to have watched all the other MCU projects to understand the Infinity War and the Infinity War film and the Endgame film? Do I need to have seen all these other MCU films to be, a part of this? Will I be lost, right? And what's interesting about this, what I've reiterated many times before on the channel, is that the MCU in itself functions like a TV show, right? Because you have all these individual episodes. And sure, you can jump into any show. You can maybe watch the pilot and a couple pivotal episodes in the middle and then watch the finale and be like, I get it. I kind of get what's going on here. I get the characters and I get the overarching storylines. But it's really those episodes in the middle that are just as important, that lay groundwork and also are entertaining in themselves, that then build out the fabric of that show that allow you to become truly invested in it, and it makes the show complete. That's what I would equate, watching the Infinity Saga to watching a season of a television show, right? Or even 2 or 3 seasons of a television show with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. I think that is exactly what happens. That you don't need to have watched all 23 films to understand what happens in Infinity War and Endgame. In fact, you might be able to go into Infinity War and Endgame because of the way that they're structured as individual films, that, you could be like, I'm just going to watch these 2 films, and you might be able to understand it. I haven't personally run across many people who have done this, but if you have, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about your experience there. But the fact that the MCU itself is functioning like a TV show means that there is a demographic. There are people out there who have, especially with how the MCU has expanded since then, have said, I'm good. There's too much here. I'm going to be lost. I'm good. Now, that's just with movies, right? And movies, even when the MCU was releasing 3 films a year, some people were like, that's a lot. In a year where they're releasing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Thor Ragnarok, I don't really want to watch, Guardians 2. I just want to watch the Spider-Man film, or I just want to see Thor 3. That's fine. That's totally fine. But even when they were releasing just 3 movies, people were like, this is a lot. Fast forward to 2021, and yes, I know the pandemic was a big part of this, but when the MCU released, what was it, 4 films and 3 shows that year or something like that? 4 films and 4 shows that year? People were really like, wow, this is a lot. And the difference here now is that we're introducing canonical live-action shows. And here's the problem. We've seen this objectively, statistically, with the film like The Marvels. Captain Marvel 1 made $1 billion. And I don't buy the argument that it was just because it was right before Endgame. I do believe that it substantively added, maybe even, let's be generous, $200 to $300 million. Sure, why not? And let's add another $100 million on top of that to be, just because of the hype of the MCU at that point, because it was really at a peak. For sure. Let's be generous here. In fact, because Captain Marvel 1 made $1 billion, and let's say $500 million of that money was because of circumstances outside of the film. Okay, sure. I don't personally buy that, but I do think that it is definitely fair to say that a portion of that $1 billion was because of factors like the peak of the MCU and being right before Endgame and knowing that Captain Marvel was going to be in Endgame. For sure. Even if that were true, and let's just say the Marvels, right? So we're starting now at a baseline of $500 million. And let's say that, there's a factor like the pandemic. Okay, you cut down another $100 million. And the Marvels wasn't as good. Let's cut down another $100 million. You're still at $100 million more. And this is all using just exaggerated numbers. But the number that I get to here, with all these mitigating factors, the Marvels should have cleared $300 million in its sleep. What accounts for the fact that the film only made $200 million? What is that remaining mark? And again, I'm just using hypothetical numbers. You might want to dispute my numbers and all that. That's fine. I'm just trying to illustrate a point here. What is that remaining portion? And I believe that it is the fact that you're introducing two characters that you had to have seen Disney Plus shows to understand where they came from. Now, I don't believe that this is as much the case with Monica Rambeau, because honestly, Monica Rambeau was a very, very much a side character in WandaVision. I don't even think people would have understood that she was in WandaVision, who hadn't really watched the show. I think they would have just been like, okay, another MCU character. In fact, they might have even been like, oh, this is, the daughter of that character in Captain Marvel. Fine. But Miss Marvel, I think it's a little harder to ignore. The fact that you're introducing her entire family to a new audience in this film, and that she is a character very specifically taken from a television show, right? I think that, look, I think it's becoming problematic even in terms of the canon itself. Secret Invasion has its problems on its own. I think most of us would agree with that to varying degrees. I myself am not one of these people who despise the show. I don't think it's particularly good, but I don't hate it either. But I think one of my big problems now with Secret Invasion is how it ties in to the Marvels, because allegedly Secret Invasion, and I don't even know if I buy this anymore, but apparently Secret Invasion takes place right before the Marvels. Well, that Nick Fury in Secret Invasion is an entirely different Nick Fury that we see in the Marvels. In fact, we don't even see his wife, who was such a big part of that Secret Invasion show. She went up with him into space, and we don't see her at all in the Marvels. So it's becoming a problem now, even when characters are crossing over into different properties, that they are just not the same character, right? All the things that these characters have been through in their own individual shows, it's just not the same. And the question becomes, how does Marvel handle this? Because it doesn't look like they're backing down from their TV shows. They are changing up the model a little bit with, they're focusing on characters like Agatha Harkness and Ironheart and Daredevil, right? But eventually, I think you're going to want characters like Daredevil to appear in the movies, right? You can't just have him be in the television shows by themselves, especially characters like Daredevil, right? And you have a character like Ironheart who was in a movie and is coming into their show. Now, DC, I don't quite know how they're going to handle this. It seems like they are going to be very fluid in terms of, we want the same actor who's portraying this character in live action to be the one voicing them in the show. So it seems like they're going to be very kind of, it's going to be the same person, but in fluid mediums, right? But I think that also reiterates the fact that they want their shows to be part of canon as well. So here is what I propose. And bear with me, because I think that this is not an analogy that is immediately obvious. And maybe this is one that's a little head scratching, but I truly believe that this is the case. I actually think we do have one really good use case of how to develop, use the TV shows to build up characters, introduce new characters, right? And then have them, be a part of the canon so that the movie-going audience is not confused, and they don't even have to see any of the shows in order to not be confused. And this is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier branches off to Captain America, Brave New World, and Thunderbolts. I think that this is actually a perfect example. Again, not having seen those movies, right? Because those two movies might, constantly be referencing the show and people might be confused. So I don't know that for a fact, right? But I think, as of the recording of this episode, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is a case study in how to make an MCU TV show. Here is how. And I'm not talking about quality or storylines at all, because, I've done a rewatch video of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I have my problems with that show. It's messy. It's very messy. But here is what I believe worked really well for The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. If you told an average-going movie fan who had just seen the Infinity Saga films and was like, I don't have Disney Plus, I can't afford Disney Plus, totally fair, by the way, and I can't watch these shows, totally fine. If you tell them that this show just didn't exist, there was nothing that happened between Avengers Endgame and Captain America Brave New World, I think, based on the trailers, it makes sense, right? You have, at the end of Avengers Endgame, Sam Wilson taking up the mantle of Captain America. Now, what The Falcon and the Winter Soldier does is it complicates that narrative, because then he decides, I'm not worthy of this shield, and he goes through a journey of self-discovery until he becomes Captain America. But if you hadn't seen The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you probably, I'm guessing, could go into Captain America Brave New World and make that assumption, that very easy leap, and be like, oh yeah, right after he got the shield, he was just Captain America. Now, you might be asking, but what about characters like Isaiah Bradley, who is apparently going to have a pretty big role in Captain America Brave New World? What about Joaquin Torres, who's going to be the new Falcon? Honestly, I don't think that's a big deal, because look at Captain America the Winter Soldier. They just introduced Falcon. It didn't matter. He didn't need an entire backstory show to be like, this is Sam Wilson, this is who he is, and then now you're going to see him in Captain America the Winter Soldier. He just showed up. I don't think audiences need to be handheld to the point that you're like, hey, I don't get that there's a new Falcon. Can you explain everything about this character to me? And honestly, I just don't think audiences need that. I think it's totally fine. They're going to be able to buy into the fact that, oh, okay, Sam is Captain America, new Falcon, and this guy Isaiah Bradley has this backstory. As long as they explain it well in the film, I think it's totally fine. Similarly with Thunderbolts, you have characters like Bucky, who I think that based on the trailer, it doesn't look like they're really going to be connecting Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Thunderbolts in terms of Bucky's storyline, and I think that that's fine. Honestly, I think that's fine, because in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, what Bucky got was some semblance of closure. Doesn't necessarily mean that he can't revert to the Winter Soldier form, he can, but I think that what the Falcon and the Winter Soldier allowed for was some semblance of closure for Bucky as a character. And in terms of John Walker, I think it's a little more tricky, for sure, but I think that John Walker as a character could also just be easily explained that in the time between Captain America Brave New World and Avengers Endgame, the government attempted to basically replace Captain America, and it didn't work, and this is the guy. I think it's a little more complicated, and I think that this is a scenario in which, sure, that watching the TV show would definitely help, but my point is that I think that the way you do this, right, the way that you approach this, is that you have characters who, first of all, I just think introducing entirely brand new leading characters in TV shows is perhaps not a good idea. If you're gonna have Agatha Harkness, why not introduce her in a film, right? I think that this is the one case where Ironheart is actually probably a smart idea, because honestly, the amount of people who have Disney Plus, it's just not as big as you might think. And I just think that it's not worth it to alienate a part of your audience by going, who is Moon Knight? Who is She-Hulk? Who is Agatha? Who are these people? I think you have to introduce these big, I'm not talking side characters, I'm talking big new characters in the movies, and then they can branch off into their own TV shows. And I think that following the format of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where you can go from movie to movie, and things can happen to that character in between in their own TV show, but it just has to make enough sense to go from movie to movie that movie-going audiences are going to be like, yeah, I buy that. I don't know if this is the approach that they're going to be taking, because it looks like we're going to get a whole lot of shows that are going to introduce new characters. I don't personally like the idea that is being floated around here, that Marvel is going to completely cut off the TV and movie universes to a certain extent, because they're going to want to kind of silo the TV shows into their own separate world, like Agatha, Agatha All Along, or Ironheart is just going to be, side adventures, right? And these characters are really not going to affect the main MCU continuity. I just don't think that makes sense, because the things that are happening in Agatha All Along, for example, are pretty consequential, right? Not to spoil anything, but they're pretty consequential. Similarly, like I started out the segment, Daredevil is an important character. And yes, sure, he's appeared as Matt Murdock in Spider-Man No Way Home, but people who don't know Daredevil, they didn't know that. And so then just to have Daredevil Born Again happen, and then have Daredevil just show up in Avengers Doomsday and be like, I'm here, guys, people are going to be lost. And so I think personally that in the future, this is how the MCU should approach making their TV shows. And I'm curious to see if the DCU will take this approach as well. But I ask you guys, what do you think about this idea? Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think the best way for these studios is to make these TV shows? Like, how do you think they should best approach making their canonical TV shows to tie into the movie so that movie-going audiences who don't watch the shows aren't confused? Let me know in the comments down below.